Good morning. Do you guys feel like you, I don't know, magically lost an hour or something last night? Yeah, well, this whole daylight saving thing is, I'm kind of over it, you know? I don't know about you. It's 50-50, as the man says. Anyone get that? Okay, all right, one person. All right, Artie's got me. Yes? Is he not here? Uh-uh. He get cleanly shorn last night? It'll grow back tomorrow? He won't shave till next year. Okay. Well, Tom, is Tom still got the beard on? I saw Tammy. Is Tom here, I guess?
Yes, he is.
Is he still got a beard?
Yes, I think he does.
Good. Good.
I saw whispers. I looked from the side. I think I saw six.
Yeah. Ladies, something you want to share with the class?
No, sir. You just look very fashionable today.
Hey, you know.
Oh, yeah, that's on the tie. Just now noticed. Oh, my goodness.
I don't know what you all are talking about. We're moving on to Esther. All right, Lisa, you got some work to do, girl, because we did not have any comments last class, and I was getting bored, so here we are. Entertain me, Lisa. Well, all right. Chapter 6.
Don't mention it. Be careful what you ask for.
Comments, but it was a certain type of comments you didn't have.
Yeah, that's. I don't know who likes sarcasm in this church. All right. If you remember, Haman's the bad guy, right? In this play, Shakespearean from the ancient Jewish world. All right. First tangent of the class. Y'all ready? So I'm in a early church fathers or apostolic fathers class through Heritage Christian University. And so this class is like my jam because we get to do a little bit of history, and then why do we have certain books in the Bible and not other books of the Bible, and what's the deal with all that, and what do the first 300 years of Christianity look like, and what they write and what they say, and how close is it to what we read in the New Testament, or where are the deviations from men's influence in that tradition going on. And then, I mean, long story short, it's like how did the Bible become the Bible is kind of what that's my jam. And so when you look at the early church fathers, so-called, the people that were Christians in the first 300 years, before this whole Catholic tradition came to be a thing, what'd they all say? And so what's interesting is through research and for a big boy paper I got to write at the very end of class, then I'm basically kind of trying to prove why Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the fourfold gospel accounts, are the ones that are legitimate in light of the other ones that have people's names attached to them that didn't write it until so-called 300, 200 years later. So anyway, one of the points I'm trying to make is that when you're looking at the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament would call it, the book of Esther was like the book to try to debate on whether or not it was inspired, if it should be a part of the canon or scripture. Because, if you will recall, what's our bonus fact about this particular book? The name of God is not mentioned whatsoever in this book until you have the additions that were added in Greek later, which we know it's not from the actual original time of writing this. And so when you're looking at Esther, you're looking at a book that not only the Jews before Jesus, they had questions about its legitimacy, but also the Christians that picked up the Jewish traditions are like, well, if they didn't think that Esther should be in there, do we think Esther should be in this list of books that are important and inspired by God? And that was debated for, a good long while. And so as we're reading it, kind of keeping that in the back of our minds, it kind of, we see this is an unusual biblical book because not only God is not mentioned, but also the style of it is not historical in nature, meaning it's not just giving us the facts as you read 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. You're like, this guy did this, and this guy did this, and this guy did this, and this happened, and so on. That's just a historical narrative. This is a play, right? This is a Shakespearean-style play of these events unfolding, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. And so at the end of the last act, you'll remember that Queen Esther is trying to get a case to be pled for the Jews in front of King Xerxes, or Ahasuerus, as he's called in this text. And so she had a big banquet, a big feast for him and the queen to enjoy this meal together. And she made sure that Haman, the bad guy, because he had a curly Q mustache, right? That's how they all look, right? Okay. He was invited too. And so he's going home. He's feeling pretty great about himself, if you recall. And he's like, I am having a blast because it was a private dinner for the king and the queen, and I was there, and I'm so great. And then on the way home, who does he see? Mordecai. Just ruined his whole night. Just ruined it. Because this guy is like, that is the one why I'm killing all the Jews. He's the one. And so if you'll look at here, verse 13 of chapter 5, yet all this is worth nothing to me, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, let a gallows, is the English word there, 50 cubits high be made, and in the morning tell the king to have Mordecai hanged upon it. Then go joyfully with the king to the feast. And that's going to perk you right up. Just kill this guy that you don't like that much, and you'll feel better, the wife says. This idea pleased Haman, and he had the gallows made. Okay, so if you were here last week, I made a little offhand comment about that word gallows, to the chagrin of our eldership who were looking at me like, what are you talking about? So what's the little fun fact I gave you? Yeah, so gallows, immediately we're going to, Italy for spaghetti westerns, right? You got Clint Eastwood there. He's looking through his squinted eyes at somebody hanging on the gallows. He's going to shoot that rope, right? That's the idea of a gallows. Hanged by the neck until dead is the old classic Western phrase, right? Technically, when you're looking at this particular text, gallows isn't really the right word to use here. It's not the Hebrew there, and it kind of will flavor the story for you later when this gallows are used. No doubt on Mordecai, right? Don't want to give you a spoiler. So the gallows, yeah, you die on it, but it's a pike. It's a large piece of tree trunk that is buried into the ground, and there's a sharp, pointy end on the top. And so you can imagine this is going to be a little bit less efficient as an execution method than a gallows would be. So, yeah, Vlad, good guy except for the impaling part, right? Yeah, so that's the idea here. A bit more brutal, but he loved the idea. He's like, yeah, it sounds good to me. Haman thought Mordecai definitely should die on this giant sharp stick in the earth until he's dead. And so, wouldn't you know it, chapter 6, verse 1, on that night, the Bible is clever, is it not? Just so happened. And I love when the Bible does that, is because the Bible knows what it is, and the scribes who copy this thing knows what's going on. But they're not going to outright just say it. They're going to say, let the reader interpret this for what it's worth. It just so happened. Wouldn't you know it, that night? Just funny coincidence. Just weird. The king couldn't sleep. By the way, nothing ever good happens when the king can't sleep. Just want to throw that out there as a biblical theme. I got two examples that come to mind. This one and then, David. Just couldn't sleep that night. Weird. And he gave orders to bring the book of memorable deeds, the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. So what is his favorite way to go to sleep? Have a bedtime story. And what is a better bedtime story than reading the Chronicles of a Kingdom? If you've ever read 1st and 2nd Chronicles, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's hard to stay engaged and focused. He's like, I can't sleep. I mean, I might as well get some work done, right? So cracks open the laptop of the scroll, I suppose, and then the guy is reading him the Chronicles. And wouldn't you know it? Just so happened he couldn't sleep. Just so happened that someone's reading him the Chronicles. And just so happened, verse 2, it was found written how Mordecai had told about Bigthana, which is a bad name for a child, and Teresh, 2 of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, and who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. Remember that from back in the day? Like previous chapters before? Mordecai heard a plot about, hey, let's murder the king. And then Mordecai turned them in, and then they were taken care of. And then the king was safe from that, right? Verse 3, and the king said, what honor or distinction has been bestowed upon Mordecai for this? And the king's young men who attended him said, nah, nothing. Nothing has been done for him. The king said, who's in the court? Now, wouldn't you know it? Just so happened. Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to speak to the king about having Mordecai hanged on the gallows, to be polite, that he had prepared for him. I mean, come on now. This book is a wild book. Just so happened. Just so happened. Just so happened. Just so happened. So you've got Haman, who's like, I want to murder or execute Mordecai. King just can't sleep that night. Has a history book which will put anyone to sleep immediately. Read it. He's like, oh, yeah, Mordecai saved me from those 2 guys that were eunuchs that were plotting to kill me. What have we done to show him our thank you? What is it? Oh, nothing. Who's in the court right now? You know what? Funny you mentioned. Haman just walked in. Perfect guy for the job, right? Verse 5. And the king's young men told Haman's in there, sitting in the court. King said, hey, perfect, bring him in. So Haman came in. The king said to him, oh man, come on now. This is just, what should be done to the man whom the king delights to honor? If you were a king and you wanted to honor somebody, what would you do, Haman, right-hand man? Haman said, whom would the king delight to honor more than moi? Right? Haman said to the king, for the man whom the king delights to honor, tell you what I'd like. Let the royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, best robes in the house. And the horse the king has ridden, best horse in the stables, okay? And on whose head a royal crown is set. Let me pretend to be you for a second. How about that? So everyone sees me being the king. Wouldn't that be great? Let the robes and the horse be handed over to one whom the king's most noble officials. Let them dress the man whom the king delights to honor. Let them lead him on the horse through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. I mean, come on now. I think maybe he's thought about this once or twice before. I don't know, on the top of my head, I mean, give me all this stuff. The king said, hey, good idea. Hurry, take the robes and the horse, as you have said, and do so to Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Leave out nothing that you have mentioned. Not quite yet. I mean, come on. Imagine. Put yourself in the sandals or maybe even boots at this point. This guy's rich of Haman. And you're like, I want to go ask the king to murder this guy or execute this guy. Let's go do that. You walk in and the king's like, hey, I want to honor somebody. How would you do it, Haman? He goes, I would do all this stuff for him. Great. The guy that you want to have executed, do all that nice stuff to him. Appreciate it. I mean, come on. So, Haman took the robes and the horse, and he dressed Mordecai and led him through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. I mean, imagine you're Mordecai. You know Haman's got it out for you. You've been fasting in sackcloth and ashes, and you're all upset because your entire nation is going to be killed by this empire. And you're kind of the reason for it because this guy doesn't like you and you won't bow down before him. So then you're in your bed that night and you hear a knock on the door and it's Haman. And you're like, man. We're adding a lot to the text, okay? Bear with me. And what does Haman say? Hey, listen, I got some stuff for you from the king. Got some, royal robes and a crown and king's horse, and I'm going to put this on you, and then we're going to walk around the city square, and I'm going to be shouting some stuff about how great you are. And as you're being paraded through the city square, people are like, what's going on here? And you see this gallows that's been erected. Like, that's weird. That wasn't here last night. That's strange. There's some high gallows over here. Weird, right? He's like, yeah, well, don't worry about that. This is, of course, just flipping the narrative on its head. Haman's not getting what he wants quite yet. Okay. Questions, comments? Again, heavy paraphrase and additions by me because it just reads that way to me. Anything?
Is this maybe to show how closely God watches his children?
Sure. Sounds good. Sounds good to me. I mean, there's obviously a spiritual perspective, a heavenly perspective on all this, but we're not given that insight. Unlike Job, which is like the least likely one, some dudes have some terrible stuff happens to him, but we get that kind of behind the scenes thing at the very beginning of Job. So you kind of know how to read it. And then the rest of Job, for example, you don't get that heavenly vision, that viewpoint really ever again. Everything's from the perspective of someone boots on the ground going through it. You kind of have a little bit of it towards the end where God's like, who do you think you are? Which is not a great response. But still, this is not giving us that kind of behind the scenes at all. Okay, here we go. Verse 12. Then Mordecai returned to the king's gate. That was a great night for him. Haman hurried to his house, mourning with his head covered. Poor Haman. Didn't get to execute the guy he doesn't like. Oh. And Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him. Then his wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of the Jewish people, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him. Well, I mean, just rain on his parade again. Made him feel better, say, let's put some pikes in the ground and we'll kill him on there. Okay, sounds good. And then he comes back, man, it didn't work. All right, anyway. Sure.
I noticed they mentioned his wife's name.
Yep.
Times. Was she, I don't recall her name.
It's Zeresh.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
Was she somebody special outside this book?
Not as far as I know. The only comment outside this book about Haman was he is an Agagite, so from the line of Agag that Saul could have killed but didn't, and Samuel took care of the king. So no, not as far as I know. This is kind of one of those stories though that's it's not commented on by really any other biblical text. The only exception would be Agag. That detail was added there. Was inserted in there to give us some context to if Saul took care of his job, then we wouldn't have this bad guy here at this point in time. His lineage would be murdered. But no, this is kind of outside of Scripture. Right? So, okay. Anything else? All right, so if you'll notice here, whatever Bible you carry, you might have these little subtitles. Right, these little section breaks here. So you'll notice how verses 13 and 14, if you're just reading it in a scroll and you're scrolling through, I mean, it's all one thing anyway. But if you've got an English Bible in a translation, they try to break it up by paragraphs or sections for us. And they say, the translators, that verse 14 goes with the next chapter. So you'll see that. Not a big deal. So some, even New Testament books will have that in like Paul's epistles, for example. You'll recognize that the context for one verse kind of fits better with the next train of thought, so they will insert that there for you. So, I mean, the verse numbers aren't even there in the original anyway. That wasn't until like, Dark Ages, Middle Ages, that you've got that added anyway. So just be aware of it. It's kind of one of those things. Okay, verse 14. While they were yet talking with him, the king's eunuch arrived and hurried to bring Haman to the feast that Esther had prepared. Okay, the day's looking better, right? If you're Haman, all right. Last night, yesterday was kind of rough. But, the queen's feast is going to happen. A place of honor. Nothing's going to go bad at this next feast. I mean, it's going to be fine. Okay, chapter 7, verse 1. So the king and Haman went to the feast with Queen Esther. On the second day, as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king again said to Esther, "What is your wish, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. What's your request? Even to half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled." So the same old here. Like, what's going on? Like, honey, I know we're kind of new at this whole marriage thing. What do you want? What do you want? Queen Esther said, "If I found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be granted me for my wish, and my people for my request." What's that? What did you just say? The big thing that you've been acting up this whole time to get my petition, to get my ear? You've made me happy. What's up? Your life's in danger, and your entire people are in danger. Well, that's not some small thing. First, I'm hearing about it, if you're Ahasuerus. Because, she says, verse 4, "We have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated." Does that ring a bell? I mean, once is enough. Twice is too much. 3 times is like, there's something that's going on here. If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have been silent. For our affliction is not to be compared with the loss of the king, or to the king. Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther, "Who is he? And where is he who has dared to do this?" Okay. Okay, story time. So we were 2 weeks ago, Saturday. Y'all were away on your ladies' retreating, enjoying the place, right? And so on Saturdays, normally, Maddie and Luke desire to go to a park. They want to go out and play all day long on Saturdays. And so the closest playground/park to us is the Air Museum. So they all ask, "Can we go to the Air Museum? Can we go to the Air Museum? Can we go to the Air Museum?" Yeah. And so that day, I went and I was hanging out with George. You call him Mike, don't know why, but George Turner. And so we're hanging out, we're having a conversation, and the kids are playing on the playground. And then Maddie walks over, and she's got this look on her face. And I've seen that look before. I know that look's not a good look. And I'm like, "What's going on?" She goes, "I want to go home." I was like, "Huh?" She's like, "I want to go home." I'm like, "Okay, that's not you. Why do you want to go home?" "Well, there's a boy over there, and I wanted to play on this thing." And then the story goes on and on and on, but the gist of it is this. There was another boy who was being a bully, and she didn't like that. And he said to her, "If you don't get off this piece of the playground, I'm going to get my older brother to come over there and beat you up." And so when I heard that, I was like, "Where is he? Show me the kid. I want to talk to the mom and dad." And so we walked over and we saw this little kid. And I'm going to be very nice about this. I saw the kid, and I saw the parents, and saw the mom and dad, and I was like, now I have a choice to make. Would the parents appreciate Me as a fellow parent going over there and saying, you know what, maybe your son wasn't as kind as he could have been when he threatened my daughter. Or are they the kind of people that would not like that information and would be aggressive towards me and then George, who was next to me? Now, I wasn't afraid because, you got George next to me, and he's got the same vibe I've got, and so I think they would have felt a little bit threatened if two men walked over to him with blood in their eyes saying, your son threatened my daughter. Now we're going to figure out what's what. So I'm like, okay, here's what we're going to do. Maddie, we're going to get some ice cream. Everything's going to be okay. And we're going to move on and have a great day anyway. So when I read this in verse 5, who is he? And where is he? This is the king of this Medo-Persian Empire who's like, someone threatened to kill my new queen and her whole group of people? Where is this guy? Esther said, a foe and an enemy, this wicked Haman. And Haman was terrified before the king and queen. You got that right. Why do you think he was invited to the banquet feasts? So she can say, that dude over there that's not in our family, who's a wicked foe and enemy trying to kill all my people, he's right there. All right. Now this next part, okay, you got to bear with me. This is one of those things that y'all don't like that much, but I got to be honest with you. There's a little bit of confusion on interpretation in the text. When we get there, you'll know it, okay? If you don't agree with the statement, you don't have to. Nothing in this book, by the way, is a matter of salvation in my estimation. It's a narrative. It's a story. Okay, verse 7. The king arose in his wrath from the wine drinking, as you do, and went into the palace garden. So he's going to go and cool off. This is the version of him and George going to get ice cream for the little girl who's upset, right? This is that. He's going to go cool off for a second because you know what he's thinking. Haman stayed in the room with the queen to beg for his life from Queen Esther because he saw that harm was determined against him by the king. No joke. He's like, I've got one shot to try to walk away from this with my life. And I'm going to beg the queen that she, help me in the situation. But begging for his life to Queen Esther, who feels threatened by this guy who's a foe and an enemy, if you're already trying to cool off and not be heated by walking out into the garden for a second, verse 8, the king returned from the palace garden to the place where they were drinking wine, and Haman was falling on the couch where Queen Esther was. Okay, so he's trying to beg for his life. He goes out to kind of cool off, comes back in, sees this guy falling over the place where she is. He makes some assumptions about what's taking place. We know from the story that he's trying to beg for his life. Apparently, that's not how the king sees it. The king said, will he even assault the queen in my presence and my own house? And as the word left the mouth of the king, they covered Haman's face. Okay, so here's that thing, verse 8. Was he trying to assault Queen Esther? Well, the story said the previous verse, no, he wasn't trying to do that. He was trying to beg for his life. But the king saw it and said, he's trying to assault her in my house? Ain't no way, right? So any questions about that? That's one of those tricky ones. I don't think, because we're told in the story what's taking place. So jumping to the conclusion of how he was trying to assault her is on the king, not on the text. So I don't have any questions on that personally, but if you've got one, I'll hear it.
Esther's not going to say, oh, excuse me, he did not mean to fall on me.
Yeah, well, you know. So they covered his face. What's that mean? Well, not yet. We don't want you to see this next part, Haman. Let's put a sack over your head and we'll carry you out. Y'all seen movies, right? Yeah. Okay. All right. Just make sure you know. Then Harbona, Y'all know Harbona, right? One of the eunuchs in attendance on the king said, moreover, you know what? Funny coincidence. We got the perfect thing for Haman. If you're looking to kill him, we got a really bad way to go. The gallows, or pikes, that Haman has prepared for Mordecai, whose word saved the king, the guy who saved you, he wanted to kill that guy too, is standing at Haman's house, 50 cubits high. The king said, yeah, that'll work. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. And then the wrath of the king abated. He felt better. I mean, you want to say poor Haman, but not really. I mean, come on now. The he's the bad guy. So, I mean, who knows whether or not Queen Esther was put in that position for such a time as this. But it seemed like it all worked out so far. But there's a problem. If you might recall, there's a little bit of detail added here about the laws of the Medo-Persian Empire. You make a law, you can't repeal it. I mean, who thought that up, right? Bad move. Chapter 8, on that day, King Ahasuerus gave to Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. I mean, just perfect. Mordecai came before the king, and Esther had told what he was to her. By the way, husband, Mordecai, the guy who saved your life, he's Jewish. By the way, so am I. The king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, hopefully before the whole, pike thing, and gave it to Mordecai. Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Oh, how the tables have turned. Then Esther spoke again to the king. She fell at his feet and wept and pleaded with him to avert the evil plan of Haman, the Agagite, and the plot that he had devised against the Jews. When the king held out the golden scepter to Esther, Esther rose and stood before the king. She said, if it please the king, if I found favor in your sight, and if the thing seems right before the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, come on, let an order be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who were in all the provinces of the king. Because how can I bear to see the calamity that's coming to my people? Or how can I bear to see the destruction of my kindred? The king Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, behold, I've given Esther the house of Haman. They have hanged him on the gallows because he had intended to lay hands on the Jews. But you may write as you please with regard to the Jews in the name of the king, and seal it with the king's ring, for an edict written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's ring, which cannot be revoked. So his plan is what? Listen, word's already out. This is going to happen. We can't change it. But y'all figure out a way to change this into a more beneficial situation. You've got my authority, you've got my approval, do what you can to solve this issue. The king's scribes were summoned at that time in the 3rd month, which is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day. An edict was written according to all that Mordecai commanded concerning the Jews to the satraps, governors, and the officials of the provinces from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, to each province in his own script or language, and to each people in his own language, and also to the Jews in their script and their language. He wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed it with the king's signet ring. Then he sent the letters by mounted couriers riding on swift horses that were used in the king's service, bred from the royal stud, saying that the king allowed the Jews who were in every city to gather and defend their lives, to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate any armed force of any people or province that might attack them, children and women included, and to plunder their goods. On one day, throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, a copy of what was written was to be issued as a decree in every province, being publicly displayed to all peoples, and the Jews were ready to be on that day to take vengeance on their enemies. So here's the big deal. There was already a law that had gone through. Hey, on this particular day, of a particular month, you're going to kill, annihilate, destroy all Jews. Now, part 2 comes out. By the way, the Jews can defend themselves. So it's kind of like up to you what you want to do here. Which one do you want to follow? Right? That's the solution, because you can't revoke that law. You can amend it by saying, by the way, they're not going to just take it, they're going to fight back. Okay. Then Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal robes of blue and white, with a great golden crown and a robe of fine linen and purple, and the city of Susa shouted and rejoices. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. And in every province and in every city, wherever the king's command and his edict reached, there was gladness and joy among the Jews, a feast and a holiday. So what's the word holiday mean? What? Oh, nothing? Okay, that sounds about right. So the origin of the word holiday in the English language means holy day, right? If you didn't know, now you know. Holy day is a holiday. The Jews would have a feast day or a holy day unto the Lord because of this great victory that they would achieve by not being completely annihilated in the Medo-Persian Empire. What is that Jewish feast and holy day unto the Lord called? Purim, right? Because pure was the word that they would use for casting lots of what day they would all be destroyed by Haman. And now they're going to use that same casting of lots to remind themselves of this story in that great holy day unto the Lord. And many from the people of the country declared themselves Jews for fear the Jews had fallen on them. They could finally say what they were because they were afraid of dying before. Okay, questions, comments? Purim in the English. You are welcome. Real quick. Maybe. Not now. Okay, chapter 9, verse 1. Now in the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, on the 13th day of the same, when the king's command and edict were about to be carried out, on the very day when the enemies of the Jews hoped to gain the mastery over them, the reverse occurred. Weird, right? This whole story is full of those reversals. The Jews gained mastery over those who hated them. Pause there. So, next class, we're going to finish the book of Esther. And then what we'll do at the end of class, to the guys back there behind the darkened, tinted glass, we're going to show the Bible Project video of the book of Esther. Now, I like to do that to kind of give us a visual, usually at the beginning. We're going to do that for basically every book, but the problem is it's a comprehensive video that ruins the story for you if you've never read it before. And there's a couple of us in here that have never heard the story in its entirety. You've heard some highlights, but not the whole thing. And so when you are able to see the visuals that go along with this story, it's a well-crafted book because every chapter has a parallel where the inverse happens what happened in the previous chapter. So you'll see it visually, Lord willing, and the creek don't rise next week. Okay, we'll pause here and pick up verse 2, finish the book, watch the video, and then we'll move on to the Mount Everest of the New Testament after Esther is done. The book of Romans. Romans. Okay, thank you all.